Parminder, I'm so happy that you agreed to come on to Aunty Lou's Hour. Um, Parminder from NAS. Could you tell us a little bit more about NAS?
Yeah, I'm so happy to join you on Aunty Lou's Hour. My name is Parminder Sekon. I'm the CEO of NAS. For those of you who don't know what NAS is a HIV and sexual health agency. We were set up in 1991, so nearly 32 years ago. We serve Black, Brown, and global majority communities. That was our mandate. That was
Yeah.
our remit back in the day. That's who we work with. And there are a couple of services where we work with communities outside of those target groups, but by and large, we're a Black and Brown organization.
Wow. And so there's a few things that I want to talk to you about. I'm not sure where to start, but I think I'm going to start with to get involved. Like where did the um zero HIV stigma? How did that come about?
You know, that's such a good question. And I know exactly when it came about because we were in the height of the first lockdown with the
Yeah.
COVID pandemic. So it
Yeah.
was summer, it was August 2020. And we had a board meeting at NAS and we were talking about HIV stigma. And our wonderful medical director, Dr. Vanessa Appiah, who works at Bart's
Mhm.
Hospital, we were talking about stigma, and she said we really ought to have an international
Yeah.
uh, movement where everybody comes together on one day and just
Mm.
really there's a cohesive point focus point where we're focusing on HIV stigma, because there are lots of countries in the world, and the UK and the States are very good at mobilizing, but there are lots of other places as well
Yeah.
where there's lots of grassroots activities happening, places in South Africa, in Ghana, in
Yeah.
Kenya, lots of different places in Europe and Latin America. But we just wanted to create a a focal point, one day of
Yeah.
action. Now we've got World AIDS Day, and
Yeah.
we have Pride, and there are lots of different points in the year where
Yeah.
we are actually focused on the experiences of people living with HIV and allies and people affected by HIV. But we just thought that with stigma, we
Yeah.
have to we have to keep the pressure up. We have to keep the
Absolutely.
momentum up. We
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
keep it reinventing what we do. And there's more than just one way of tackling this problem. And stigma is a problem.
It is.
Uh, and we've got to have creative, innovative, new ways, because we've got to be relentless about it.
No,
We can't just say we've
absolutely.
done that, sign it off. We've just got to keep attacking the problem. So we thought, why not have a zero HIV stigma day? And we
Yeah.
approached IAPAC, we approached the Global HIV Collaborative, which is a
Yeah.
bunch of strategic leaders right across the world, but
Yeah.
focusing on centering the Black experience, and
Yeah.
fast track cities. And here we
Yeah.
are, 3 years on, we're doing it.
Well, I'll tell you something, Pominda. When I saw the zero stigma HIV stuff come up on, I think it was Instagram, it really spoke to me. And it spoke to me because when I think about stigma now, I see it more than just HIV. I just see it as judgment in general. Just and I know there's an intersectionality in relation to all the different layers. So it's quite interesting that you're working with communities from the Black and Brown communities. And that's one thing that I wanted to ask you about, actually. So if I trace my mind back to when I first found out about when I first heard about HIV, it was in the 1980s. It was the gay communities, communities that were not from England, let's say. But I don't seem to see many brown communities. I thought I was undercover, but I think there's something there. And if there's any community my heart goes out to, it's that community because of the layers. I'm not saying that they're any different than any other communities, but I just think that I just don't see them. I don't.
I think stigma is strong. And you know, the way I look at it is that I don't know if you've heard of Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde talks about
Mm.
the oppressor. And she was a feminist academic in the 70s, and sadly she's passed away now, but really, really respected. And she talked about how stigma and oppression really works
Yeah,
when the oppressor leaves that shard, that that shard of self-doubt, of oppression deep inside each and every one of us. And that's when the oppressor's work is done, because the oppressor doesn't have to do anything else, because you know what,
yeah,
we've absorbed their negative messages, and
yeah,
we then we then live it. And so
yeah,
the power of self-stigma, as well as combating external stigma, I mean, that's a double whammy. That
yeah,
is quite a lot to work against. And I think that's one of the reasons why NAS came about in 1991, because actually there weren't organizations that were representing, and there are many marginalized
yeah,
communities,
yeah,
and
yeah,
South Asian communities were one of them. But it's not just
yeah,
South Asian, it was Latin American, it was
yeah, yeah,
all
yeah.
people of color, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. Because, like that message, I keep going back to the 80s, and and that message I think is imprinted on so many people's mind. And this sorry, I'm dyslexic, so it takes me time just to say it. Yeah, the zero stigma HIV day. I feel like it's the new kind of message compared to that 1980s message of the tombstones and you're gonna die and everything's like doom and gloom, and this message, which is kind of new, and yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, actually, to all of you that are doing this, from somebody who's been living with HIV, Parminder, for so many years. And when I found out I was HIV, around that time, I was working in a really high profile career. I'd met Tony Blair. He'd heard about the work I was doing. Everything was great. So I was kind of in a leadership position. And then to find this out, like, it floored me. And then I suppressed it and I told nobody. And it's taken many, many years to get to this stage where I'm out. And now hearing what NAS and the Global Collaborative and whatever in City, sorry, I just forget all the names, what you guys are all doing together is, I don't know, I just want to say thank you from someone like me who wanted to hear something like this.
Well, thanks, Louise. Thanks for saying that. And we obviously we want it to resonate with people living with HIV. We want people to feel, and not every campaign is going to be for everybody. And
Yeah,
and and the truth is that none of these campaigns happen in isolation. I mean, this campaign is going to be happen on the 21st of July. We
yeah,
chose that day for a reason. We
yeah,
chose that day because that's the birthday of Prudence Mabele, South
yeah,
African iconic HIV and gender activist. So all of these campaigns,
yeah,
they're built on the legacies and the voices of people like you, of people
yeah,
like Prudence, of people like our service users that um, that have shared their experience. So it
yeah,
hasn't happened in a vacuum. And there have
yeah,
been lots of different contributions. I mean, in March this year, we went on the Fight HIV Stigma March through the streets of London. That was
yeah,
organised by the HIV Providers Forum. There's lots of different initiative, and that's what's so great, because
you know,
we need lots of different voices, lots of different approaches, and add them all together. And I think
yeah,
it's the collective power that I think is really strong. When one person's voice goes down, somebody else's voice comes up. It's
Absolutely.
not just one voice.
Yeah. Because you know what, Parminder, I was speaking to many people who are living with HIV and talking about what what their challenges are. And the majority of people I speak to, they always talk about stigma. Do you think, like, I mean, I haven't asked Chat GPT recently, but do you think it's changing? Do you think stigma, or do you think do we know? Are there figures on
I
that?
I think it is changing.
Yeah,
And I think that 4 decades on,
yeah,
um, you know, the community of people living with HIV, there's less and less and less tolerance
yeah,
for shame, for
yeah,
stigmatizing attitudes, because people
yeah,
have
yeah,
gone through an awful lot. People have sacrificed so much. Families, people affected, people living with HIV. And I think we have reached a point where it's zero tolerance. We
yeah,
really have, because you know what? It's undermining progress. We've
yeah,
got we've got PrEP. We've got one tablet a day.
yeah, yeah,
We've got women. We've gone from women being told they
yeah,
need to have terminations to
yeah, 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 yeah,
women having, giving
yeah,
birth and raising families, women adopting, families adopting.
yeah,
Um, we've seen the reversal of so many homophobic driven uh, laws and legislations. We've seen a lot of what we call policy violence against
yeah,
people,
yeah,
refugees, asylum seekers. So I
yeah,
think the appetite for this carrying on is really zero to,
yeah,
little to zero. So, and yet, and yet, you you talk to people, and people are still back in that
yeah,
1980s mindset of, well, you can't have children, can you? And you can't have a normal life, and all of those
yeah,
really misinformed
yeah,
uh, opinions. And we're in the world of U equals you, and you
yeah,
can't
yeah, yeah,
pass it on, and undetectable. And in fact, um, you'd be better off if you're having, unprotected sex, that
yeah,
it's with somebody who's living with HIV, who
yeah,
takes care of their sexual health, rather than meeting someone in a club that you've never don't know anything
yeah,
about.
yeah.
Um,
You,
and it's about turning people's mindsets around to say, we have moved on. You need to move on.
you're so spot on. I'm so glad you said that, because I say that to myself all the time. But it's so nice to hear someone else say that, you know. And I think that, like, when I talk about HIV now, and when I, talk to people like you about HIV, it's like, yeah, it's what it is. You take your tablet, you look after yourself, you get tested, you take your medication. But I think, yeah, for some people, it's still like, wow, it is about the education. And I always say there's two things around stigma. There's the self-stigma, which is
Mm.
one issue, it's an issue within itself. And then there's stigma and judgment from others. And I think we can do a lot of work, as a community, as a HIV global community, to educate people about the reality of HIV. And then there's another piece of work for people living with HIV and people living in fear of judgment, about self-worth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of self-worth, and
Yeah.
reminding people, when we all know what it feels to be ground down
Yeah.
as people of color, as women.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
um, because you've talked about that intersectional stigma.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
we know that we live in an ableist society where disability for a lot of people is an afterthought when it comes to reasonable adjustments and all of
Yeah.
that. We know what racism looks like, feels like. We know how it affects us deep
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
We know those moments when we walk into a room, you know, what people might be thinking. They see our gender, they see our skin color. Those are the first two things they see before we've even opened our mouths. And we bolster ourselves because we've had a lifetime of knowing that, which is
Oh,
what something that white people don't have to deal with. So we know what it feels like on an ethnicity basis.
yeah.
But then
Yeah.
if you add to that HIV, you add to that gender, you add to that sexual orientation, gender identity.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot of stuff to negotiate. So you can understand why people might not feel safe
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
come out and share their status.
I'm so glad you brought that up in terms of being a woman and, you know, being a woman of color, because I can't even express right now how I felt being only Black woman around the boardroom table. Not the only woman. I mean, forget about being Black, just being a woman around the boardroom table, chairing meetings, and then having this additionality of HIV, you know, and being a divorced, you know, mother of three, you know, and I think that that's why I'm so empowered now. And you know, I'm absolutely doing this so that if there's anyone out there, any people out there, you know, for them to know that it will be okay. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and they are not alone. Parminder, what would you say? Let's kind of wind up now. If you had a message to anyone listening right now who feel afraid or stigmatized, what would you say?
I would say that life is short, and although sometimes it can feel very long, life is short, and I really understand the power of shame and control, and that's what stigma is. And I would say reach out. You don't
Yeah.
have to go online and show your face. You don't
Yeah.
have to you don't have to be an advocate. There are people like you, Louise, and many others that are happy to be those advocates, happy to be, you know, the face and go on social media. But what I would really say is connect with someone.
Yeah.
Connect with someone else living with HIV that you feel you can talk to, because it will help. It will help. And at NAS, and I have a long history of NAS, I've worked here for over 25 years, and I've been involved in HIV advocacy work since, well, since 1989, when I was a
Oh,
student, when
wow.
I was 21 years old. Um, and then when I joined NAS in 1994, and seen so many people come,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and the power of connection. I mean, there's nothing like it.
Parminder, sister, I bow to the divine in you.
Thank you. And I to you, Louise. Thank you for inviting me on and giving me some space to talk about Zero HIV Stigma Day. I really, really appreciate it, because
Uh-huh.
the message goes out. I hope people check out the
Yeah.
social media handles,
Yeah.
and put up a message. Put up a
Yeah.
message of solidarity, or whatever you think or feel about the day.
Okay. Thank you. Stay on the line. Let me just end this recording.